But I'm happy to answer your questions if I can. If I don't know the answer, I'll just say so.
Do you have any thoughts about the possible strategies that the U.S. and Russia could adopt to avoid a real confrontation in Ukraine?
Well, I think that it's a mutual problem in the sense of, let me give you the Russian view. You probably know a lot about the American view. The Russian view is that Russia has been mistreated, disrespected. The interests of Russia have not been taken into account by the United States. That when the Cold War was over and when the Soviet Union disappeared, the American view was, okay, you guys lost the Cold War and you scared us for a long time, and you're going to pay for it. And you're no longer a superpower, and just shut up and sit in the corner, and that's it. Now, this wasn't the initial thing. When Gorbachev first appeared, as you may or may not know, there were conversations between him and then Secretary of State James Baker about the reunification of Germany and the Berlin Wall. And what Baker told Gorbachev, and this is something Gorbachev has told me many times, I know him quite well, was, we promise NATO will not move 1 inch eastward. That's the deal. Now, it wasn't on paper, regrettably. But it's true that when this happened, when the wall came down and when Germany reunited, NATO did not move. Not until the disappearance of the Soviet Union. When the Soviet Union fell apart, then it started to move eastward, taking in Bulgaria, Hungary, Poland, so on and so forth. And when the Russians said, now wait a minute, wasn't there an agreement? The answer was no. There was an agreement with the Soviet Union, not with Russia. Yeah, absolutely. Now, once more, the whole story with Yugoslavia, the bombing of Yugoslavia, as you know, that didn't happen via the United Nations and the Security Council, but it was NATO that was used to bomb Yugoslavia because of what was going on there, whatever. And the Russians were screaming, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. And NATO, the United States, because without the United States there is no NATO, said, shut up, we're not interested. Gradually in this country, this is a nation that considers itself to be a great nation. Mm-hmm. It has that, call it a complex, call it whatever you want, but it's there. And the feeling that we're being treated like we're nobody gradually has built up anti-Americanism to an extent that did not exist in Soviet days. In Soviet days, there was, criticism of the American system, of the White House, of politics, but it wasn't anti-American. In fact, most Russians kind of liked Americans. Today it's very different. Today there's a real dislike at the grassroots level. It's a kind of a reaction to how, and finally along comes Putin, who after, he got in the year 2000, as you know, but in 2007, at a meeting of the, I think, G20 in Munich, he made this famous speech in which he told the West, you cannot treat us this way. We refuse. You have to take into consideration our interests. We have geopolitical interests just as you do, and we will not stand for this kind of treatment. From that moment on, Putin became the bad guy for the West. Before that, in the press, it was kind of like, well, who is Putin? Now we know it's Putin, and we don't like him at all. And he's tremendously popular here because he's seen as the man who brought Russia back, who stood up to the West, and in particular to the United States, and said, we will not allow this. We have our interests. And that's what Ukraine is really about. The New World Order, if you will, that was established when the Soviet Union disappeared, as seen by the United States, is a world order where there's one superpower. And that superpower is the one that everyone more or less has to respect and dance to that tune. The Russian view, as expressed by Putin, is that there is no such thing as a superpower. The world cannot be a unipolar thing. It has to be multipolar. There are interests, everyone have their interests. And we will not accept this. So that's where the real clash is. The Ukraine is about that. If, say from the very outset, when Ukraine started moving westward, it was clear that that's where it was going. If there had been some kind of an agreement signed that the Ukraine would not, for say 50 years, become part of NATO, nothing would have happened. Russia sees NATO as a threat. The Russians will say to you, why do you have NATO? There's no more Soviet Union. There's no more Warsaw Pact that you consider to be dangerous. Why NATO? NATO was created because of fear of what the Soviet Union might do. Well, there is no more Soviet Union. And yet, NATO, not only do you have it, but it's now on our borders, in Latvia and Estonia. Now you have the Ukraine going your way, and you're going to put NATO on our whole border with Ukraine? No, will not accept it. Crimea, the peninsula, with the city of Sevastopol, that's where the Russian fleet was always based. And now there's going to be the 6th US, or some kind of NATO fleet, will not accept it. Now, you could say to that, wait a minute, Ukraine has gone that way, it's their right. Sure it is. I take you back to 1962, when an independent country called Cuba and an independent country called the USSR agreed to place Soviet missiles in Cuba. Right? They had the right to do that, and there were American missiles in Turkey, right close to the Soviet Union. So good old Mr. Khrushchev said, oh, we're going to counter that. We're going to put our missiles in Cuba. As soon as the United States found out that there were going to be missiles there, in fact, some were already there, the US said, what? No, we don't care about agreements. We see that as a threat to our national security. And we will sink your ships if need be, and if there's a war, there'll be a war. Well, they had to accept that, right? And Khrushchev backed off, and the missiles were taken out, and that was the end of that story. Well, NATO on Russia's border, for this particular government, is the same thing. They see NATO as a real danger. So I repeat, if there had been this thing about no NATO, here's a signed agreement, 50 years guaranteed by the United States, by everyone, there would have been no problem with Ukraine. But it's about who's boss? Who's boss? And it's that, now you ask for a strategy? Well, what kind of strategy can you have? It's only if both sides really understand that they can't do without each other. I mean, you take what's going on in the Middle East, ISIS. The United States has not been able to do anything about it. It's gotten worse and worse. Iraq, Afghanistan, Iran, alone, the United States has not been able to do anything. And it could do a lot if Russia were there. And that's one of the, you could do some kind of bargain here. Okay, you guys help us with this, and we'll help you with that. And back off a little bit on this Ukrainian thing, and kind of, cool it. I guess Obama can't do it, because immediately he'll be jumped on for going soft on the Russians. And that'll be a blow to the Democratic Party, and that means that Hillary won't be elected. So, you can't do that. Putin is not going to back down. They have to find a deal where neither side loses face. They have to find a win-win. And I don't know if they're looking.
Can this citizen group do anything to influence the mindset of our government to go in your direction here?
I think, I think that in America, you have certain advantages that people here don't have, in that you can put pressure on your representatives. You can put pressure on your senators. You can write letters, and they care because they want to be reelected. That's not the case here. People don't have that history. They don't have that experience. They could, but they don't. So, in a certain sense, you have more of a possibility as Americans to influence the politic of your government than Russians do theirs. But I think that the state of affairs in the United States is such that, I mean, the anti-Putin / Russian propaganda has been so powerful that it's most Americans, I would say probably, are very, very anti-Russian nowadays, anti-Putin, and then of course it's the same thing. And so obviously the people in office, I mean, I'm not even talking about Mr. McCain, this great liberal progressive man, but this, he's an American hero, and I've always laughed at this. And you know what his heroism is? He got shot down over Vietnam. I mean, wow. You know?
He spent a lot of time in jail.
He did, yeah, and he probably conducted himself honorably. So, does that make you a hero? I don't think so, but that's all right. That's a different question. Anyway, so I think yes, and then I look at it long term, and in my view, long term, some of the things that should really be done, an effort should be made to make the visa issue go away as much as possible, to bring over as many thousands of Russian kids, and to bring over here as many thousand American kids to live in families, to spend a year living in an American family, living in a Russian family. Those kids will never make war on each other. They will have a different view. It's not that they'll agree with everything, but it'll be completely different. Because the pictures that both sides have of each other's are all pictures that they see on television. All of them. They're terribly influenced. All of us are. Even when we think that we're totally independent. I mean, look, I've been around the block quite a few times, and I went to Iran. And I knew what I was going to see in Iran. Ladies in black, and fists and yelling and all of that. And I get off the plane, and I go to Tehran, and I see these stunningly attractive women with lipstick and eyeshade and this, and they have a what do you call it, a shawl here on the back of their heads, right? And the only thing, all right, the skirts are lower than the knees and the sleeves are lower than the elbows. End of story. Oh, you've come to our country. Do you like it? Where do you come from? What did you, completely. Nonetheless, it's a police state. Of course it is. The minute more than 5 or 6 people get together, here they come. All true. But the picture you have is very different from what you see. In fact, it was one of the great Soviet jokes. Soviets always laughed at their system, especially the last years. When a guy comes running into an outpatient clinic and he says, I've got to see the eye-ear doctor. And the nurse says, I'm sorry, sir, there is no such thing. There's an eye doctor and then an ear, nose, throat, but there's no eye-ear. No, I've got to see the eye-ear. Don't argue back and forth. Finally, she says, look, there is no such doctor, but if there were one, why would you need to see him? Look, I keep hearing one thing and seeing something completely different. So that's pretty much where we are, believe me.
Russia and President Putin have been misrepresented by the American press and by the government. What does Russia think that America wants?
Oh, well, again, it's difficult for me to say what Russia thinks, but what public opinion polls tend to show is that the overwhelming majority of Russians believe the United States to be the most threatening country to their lives. In other words, they believe that if the United States could, it would wipe them out. And that if the United States, people say, American president, that we would like to see a strong, democratic Russia. Nah, that's not true. They don't want to see a strong Russia. They want to see a weak Russia. In fact, they'd like Russia to fall apart like the Soviet Union did. That's what they really want. They want to take over our wealth, our natural resources, our oil and our gas and our metal. That's what they want. That is the feeling about most people. That's what they see.
What reasons do they have to feel that way?
I would say it's what they're more or less told by the media.
The Russian media?
Of course. Of course. By Russian television, which is very anti-American.
Why?
Why is it anti-American? Well, because, I believe I said this at the beginning of our meeting, because the leadership of Russia in the person of Mr. Putin does not believe that you can trust the United States. He said this. You know, there was a time when Putin was seriously discussing joining the European Union and becoming part of NATO. He was told point blank, no, we don't want you guys. You're too big, you're too this, you're too that. No. So the door was slammed in his face. They had certain agreements that were not respected. And the NATO issue is one of them. So his feeling, and you know, he's a guy, I know him relatively well. That is to say, I've spoken to him twice for 1 hour, one-on-one. And he's a tough cookie. But he's not stupid. And he feels very strongly. He said, you cannot trust them. They're just figuring out a way to, to screw you. That's what they're doing. And, you know, his reasons are, he'll say, well, look at this, look at this, look at this. And he said, look at Ukraine. There was a deal made on the 22nd of February, 2014. The Minister of Foreign Affairs of Germany, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of France, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Poland were all there. They signed the guarantee. And then what do? They backed off, and they let the revolution happen, and they all went that way. And I'd been promised that this was the way it would happen gradually, that there would be normal elections. And so he said, how can you trust them?
Are you in sympathy with Putin on that?
I don't like him.
Why not?
I don't like him. He's not my cup of tea. I just, you know, he's not a pal. I understand what look, he's a patriot. He feels very strongly about his country. He wants it to be a great, strong country. In that sense, you know, he's just as much of a patriot as Reagan was, of America. He's much more intelligent than Reagan, but that's a different thing. But he can be very cold and quite ruthless. I don't like him because I don't think he's a kind man at all. And because I think that he's he's an unforgiving man.
Is he vindictive?
Huh?
Is he vindictive?
I think so.
In what way?
Well, you say something publicly about him that he really dislikes, and you're going to have problems. Not going to put you in jail. No. But, you know, if you're in the media, you're going to have problems.
Do you think there's a possibility that there could be a war between Russia and the West? Do you worry about this?
I do. I worry about it. You know, I think that on the one hand, one of the worries for me is that people are, excuse me, I will try, that people are no longer afraid of nuclear weapons. It's interesting how this has happened. I mean, you remember back then, you had kids hiding under desks in case there's a nuclear attack, and so on. And you had nuclear underground facilities, anti-women, that's all gone. Nobody seems to, you had MAD, mutually assured destruction. That's no longer there. So the danger that some idiot might figure, well, let's nuke them, you know? It's remote, but it's there. Now, There are millions of controls along the way, and so one man can't do it. But could there be a physical clash? I think it's possible. If lethal weapons are given by the United States to Ukraine, then they will be used in the southeast. And then the Russians will step in. 100%. They will not allow this. If they step in with military force, official military force, not the dressed in, but the real thing, the army, then what? I mean, Putin said it somewhat, I think he made a mistake when he said it that way, but should Russia attack militarily, Ukraine's over in 2 days. There's just no comparison. What happens? Does the West retaliate? Is anyone going to go to war over Ukraine? It's a big question, but I'm not saying it's not possible. So I worry about it. Yes, I do.
Having said what you said about President Putin, do you fear for your own safety?
I'm 81, and you'll excuse us, I say, okay? I don't. I get fired? All right, so I'll get fired. So I'll move to Paris. I have an apartment there. I love Paris. I've made enough money so that I won't be begging. Nobody's going to give me a job at my age, clearly. But I'll be okay. But my job is not to antagonize Putin. My job is to inform my audience, and not to tell them what I think. That's a different job. I say, listen to this guy. Here's what he's saying. Listen carefully now. He said this, he said that, the other. Look at it. Some people like, some people don't like, whatever. Give my audience the maximum amount of facts and let the audience make its own decision. That's what I do. Now, I can say I'm not a big fan of Putin, so what? You think Putin's losing sleep over that? I can say, well, I don't think he's democratic at all. And I've said it on the air. And I don't like the laws of the Duma that are being passed. I'm not afraid of that. But I fully realize that my show could be taken off the air. Like the one in America.
Yeah. Why can't the American media present the facts as you have done?
Well, first of all, the Russian media doesn't present the facts.
Oh.
There are I say journalism is dead. Journalism, as the fourth state, is dead. Now, it may come back to life.
East and West is dead?
No, absolutely. Not everywhere, but it's dead here. And I think it's pretty dead. Now, in the United States, now you have journalists, as you have them here. People who are journalists. But the profession is no longer there. I think it's probably much more existent, and it gives me no pleasure to say this, it's much more existent in Germany, where there's much more of what I've been talking about. Giving people information and letting them decide. But making, be objective. We're all subjective, but be as objective as you possibly can be. Be truthful. We all know when we lie, or when we tell half-truths, and give the full picture.
Have you always felt comfortable telling the truth as you know it as a journalist?
No. In the Soviet days, I was not comfortable at all. I was scared. I knew that if I spoke out, I said in 1979, when the Soviet troops went into Afghanistan, and I was interviewed by an American journalist, and I said, I think we'll regret this. Great, courageous statement. Well, I was put through the meat grinder. So I was afraid, and I was afraid of going to jail. But I have to tell you, I've overcome fear. It happened back then. And it's, I don't think that the courageous person is not the one who knows no fear. The courageous person is the one who can handle fear. Because if you don't have it, then what's courageous? And I think that I've been able to do that. You feel responsible also. If something happens to you, what about your family? What about your kids? Who's going to care for them? There's always that, and that's always used to blackmail you. Yeah, fine. It's almost like gangsters. We know you have children. That kind of thing. But by and large, no, I'm not afraid at all.
If you had the ear of President Obama before he boycotted the 70th anniversary of the Great Patriotic War victory in Russia, what would you say to him?
First of all, I'd say to him that it's not the Great Patriotic War. It's the end of the war in Europe and its victory over Nazis. It's not the end of World War II. There was still Japan, but it's the end of the war in Europe and the end of Hitler. Now, your people, that is to say, the United States, fought side by side with the Russian people, the Soviet people. You lost a lot less lives, and good. We were allies, and we did a marvelous thing. And regardless of how you feel about Mr. Putin, the Russians, how do you feel about the Russians? For them, it would be important that you come. And when you come, you can say what you want. You can criticize Putin from morning to night. You can come on my show, Mr. President, and you can speak out, and you will be on my show. Nobody will say you can't have Obama on your show. But you'd be doing something that the Russian people would remember, and you'd also be sending a message to the American people. What else can I say?
I'm troubled I'm still Ukraine. And
So am I.
I suddenly made you Secretary of State. What should America do there? I just don't know.
If I were Secretary of State and you were President, and that's why you made me Secretary of State, and the Senate endorsed me, which is not true they would, and therefore I'd be carrying out your policies, and so yes, we share those policies. I would do what John Kerry did, which is to say set up an appointment with Lavrov, his counterpart, but actually not with Lavrov, but with the President of Russia, because the President of Russia cannot officially meet with the Secretary of State. Not the same level. So officially I'm meeting with Lavrov, unofficially I'm meeting with Putin, and which is exactly what happened. And I go to Sochi, by the way. I don't meet at the Kremlin. And we speak for 4 hours. Now, why am I going? There's got to be a reason, right? And I haven't told Putin the reason. He just knows that I've asked, I'm just, excuse me, this could be Putin.
Let me talk to him.
Да? Да, я включил. Ага. Не надо, я сам закажу. So I would say to Putin, I'd say, look, I realize the situation between our two countries is very tense. I'm not going to blame you or to say we're sorry. I've come because I believe that we are in a very dangerous situation, which we would like to get out of. And in a way that both your side and my side will look good. We're terribly worried about the Middle East, about ISIS, and about what the extreme side of Islam is doing. We understand that you have an older and more experienced relationship with that part of the world, and we firmly believe that without you, it is going to be impossible to solve. We understand how disturbed you are about Ukraine. After all, for a long time, Ukraine was considered to be part of Russia. You have almost the same language, the same religion, and Rus, the very origin of Russia, came from Kiev. I've come to talk to you about how we can both make this situation pull out the fuse, defuse it. I suggest the following. First of all, we on our side will see to it that the Ukrainian government will sign an agreement according to which for 50 years Ukraine will not become a NATO member. And we will guarantee that. Not only we, but NATO and all the NATO countries will guarantee it. And we can make that happen. Once that happens, you will pull out whatever forces you have there. You're not going to return Crimea, we understand that. But you will cease any activity in southeast Ukraine. We will also see to it that there will be elections in southeast Ukraine of their own people, but that southeast Ukraine will remain part of Ukraine. That's what we'll do. Now you will do the following concerning the Middle East. And we'll put down 1, 2, 3, 4. If that kind of a conversation happened, and I'm sure it didn't, I firmly believe, now we're not going to talk about this publicly. We're just going to do it. We're making a deal here. And we don't want to make it public yet. Because if we do, there are people in my country, I would say, and there are people in your country who don't want this to happen, who are interested in preserving the tension, who want that tension. And we don't want to give them the possibility to start screaming about, we made them blink, we're just going to do this. And when we've reached the final point, we're going to announce that we've done it. It'll be done.
What do we want them to do in the Middle East? What do we want Russia to do in the Middle East?
We want Russia to agree that if you need to put boots on the ground, the Russians will do it.
Russians will go?
Yes, that the Russians will agree if there is a need to fight ISIS on the ground, that Russians will be part of that contingent.
Wow.
That's one thing. And perhaps the most important.
That'd be amazing.
Yeah.
Well, you know, I think you have to think big in these things. You can't go like this.
You're right.
Both sides, think big. Obviously, it would take a lot of details, and the devil's in the details, we all know that. But I think that with that kind of an approach, I think it could be done. I think that Putin, he would want guarantees, suspicion and so on, have to be allayed, and then on the other side as well. But I think that kind of an approach could actually work. But I'm not Secretary of State, as you know.
And you won't be.
And I won't be, and you're not President. Probably won't be. So I'm afraid that, Well, good luck. And what can I say? I hope this was useful. Okay?
It is.